Thanks. So we had the great opportunity over the last year to make some fabulous videos, and one of those is the one we just showed you, which is from the coast and from one of the programs in Depot Bay that does a summer camp that is a surfing camp. And so that's in honor of our friends that are joining us from Hawaii. So we want to thank you so much for joining this call. And we love being part of the 50 state network and all of the shared resources that we have. So I'm Beth Tarasawa. I direct the Oregon network. And we have our partners here from NSLA. So and then NWEA, and then someone from the Camp Association. So we've been fielding calls over the last few weeks as we've entered into the COVID piece with the governor's office, and we've done a lot of work on summer, and we're glad that you're joining us to have some more conversation and to hear from Beth about her research. And the next slide. Okay, so this is basically our agenda for the day. Is we're going to really try to address some of the summer slide issues, and with having been out of school for almost 3 months, it's going to be not a 3-month slide, but a 6-month slide. And then the national landscape with NSLA. And Aaron, who is the new CEO, and also a board member of the Camp Association, is with us, and understanding COVID. So that's the work that Beth has been doing from NWEA and getting prepared with the ACA. They've done a fabulous job. There's great work that has been put on their website, and the health and safety issues, which everyone is concerned about. And then some wonderful resources that the 50 State Network and Matt Boulay from National Summer Learning are have available. So I'm not sure. I'm only showing 58 people, Bethany, so I'm not sure if we'll just have other people join us, but go ahead and next slide. So this is Aaron and Beth and Matt, and you'll see them all. And I want to thank you very much for participating and sharing your knowledge and relationships. So the work you do is important to those of us that are on the intermediary level. And so you want to go ahead and move forward? So this is a little bit about Oregon Ask for people that don't know. So we're a collaboration of over 60 public and private organizations, program providers, state agencies. We've been part of the national network for 15 years. So this November is our 15th year. And so, as I said, we've been doing quite a bit of work on summer learning in partnership with NSLA. Started in 2012 with a project that came out of a conversation that Matt and I had, summer learning, summer library, summer lunch. And we did SL3 in facilitating where there is food in low-income schools. There was also a library open and additional reading that happened. And then Summer Learning Summit in 2015. And then in 2016, I was honored to actually receive a White House Champion of Change for summer learning. It was a great experience of my life. And then 2017, House Education Committee work on summer learning. We've found some champions here at the state level. In 2018, we developed and released a Smart Summers report, which then resulted in program funds that were part of our Supporting Student Success account. So summer is certainly something that's been talked about over the last few years here in Oregon, and finding ways to support our highest need students with appropriate programming and is near and dear to my heart. So summer learning, we love it. So I'm going to turn it over to Bethany.
Well, actually, I think we should be handing over to Matt, and Katie might have to reload the slides here. Or I'm sorry, not Matt, you're welcome to introduce yourself as well as our founding partner from NSLA. But I'd love for Matt and Aaron and Beth to do kind of your own introductions and let our audience know who you are and why we've asked you to share today. Since how about we go with Aaron, since you'll be sharing next.
Sure, but actually I would love, first of all, thank you to everyone for welcoming me. My name is Aaron Dworkin. I'm calling from Washington, D.C. today. I've been in the role almost a year as the new CEO of National Summer Learning Association, which has been around for more than 25 years and was founded by Matthew Boulay, who lives in Oregon and has been a great partner. He's still a board member, but a great leader. He started this organization more than 25 years ago. So I would, since he's on, I would love to just let him just say a few words and kind of, the origins and how you are now in Oregon and the stuff you and Beth have been able to do. That's amazing. And then when the slides are ready, I'll be able to expand further.
Well, thanks, Aaron, and hello to everybody. I'm in Salem, and with weather like we're having in Oregon, this is the most beautiful place in the world right now. It isn't always, but today it is. So I'm glad you all are joining us and not outdoors, at least for now. But NSLA really has had a very strong partnership for 7 or 8 years now with Oregon Ask. And the work that Beth and Bethany are doing both around the state with providers and mayors, but also as importantly in Salem with legislators, really is a model for what we're hoping other states can do. The SL3 program was, is spirit of innovation at its best. Beth and I sort of jointly realized that every school in the state has a library, and virtually every one of those libraries is closed over the summer months. So the question we asked is, what would it take to open those states, or open those libraries for just a day or two a week to give kids access to books? And we started with $5,000, and over the years demonstrated proof of concept, and now have this legislation at the federal level to provide funding to support keeping school libraries open while cafeterias down the hall in the building are serving lunches. So I think I'll say more later, but thanks for joining us, and Beth and Bethany, thanks for having me.
And I'm Beth Tarasawa. I'm the third Beth of the group. It gets a little confusing. I really appreciate the opportunity to join you all today. I'm going to be presenting some research that we've been doing on the national level about some predictions of the COVID-19 pandemic on academic outcomes. We've been doing a bunch of national tours, if you will, both the media and a variety of organizations and school districts across the country, but it's really great to be in my backyard. I'm out of Portland, Oregon, and have deep roots in Oregon, born and raised, two parents that were educators in the public school systems here. And then also Hawaii, my dad's from Hawaii, so it's great to kind of hit both sides of the family right now. So super excited to present kind of the localized context. I tailored this a little bit to think about out of school time and different organizations and community support, and really thrilled to join the group.
Thanks so much. And then I think we've got slides about ready to go. So Aaron, you can go ahead and continue.
Thank you. And so do I ask Katie just to say next slide and she'll be able to move on?
Yep.
So, okay, great. So just, and I want to be sensitive to the time, and that we have some other people from the American Camp Association going to jump on later too. And Beth from NWEA, Northwest Education Association, we just did a webinar with her as well. That was really impactful, and the research they've done, I think, has made a huge service to all of us, making the case for the work we're doing. And just so you know, I'm very clear that the further whoever is working most directly with students is the most important person. The students are the most important, and then the staff. And so it's whatever. National doesn't mean much to me, and that I would say that I feel like all of us who sit further away from kids, and in Washington further away from communities where the real work is happening, are very clear that like I work for all of you. And so if there's something I'm not covering right now, I'm available. Our team is available. You can reach out to us offline. If we don't know the answer, we might know someone who does, and we'll try and be as helpful to you as you're trying to navigate these tumultuous times. So if we go to the next slide, please. So just real quick, I mean, I think we all share similar missions. Our mission, in the way I describe our vision, is that we want every child in America, regardless of their background, zip code, income level, to be able to have a high quality summer experience every single year. Not just the kids who could afford it. We're glad that they have those great experiences, but we want all kids to have it. We're obviously trying to combat summer learning loss. If you know that phrase, summer slide, summer learning loss, that originated with the work of Matthew and our organization. Carl Alexander did some real original research on that. And then ever since then, Matthew ran with it and tried to make that, bring that to the national consciousness as a real big inequity that needs to be addressed. So we work really hard not only to combat summer learning loss, but close the achievement and opportunity gaps, which research shows grow more dramatically over the summer. So we know that. So if you go to the next slide. Now, I just got to stick a picture of smiling kids in summer, just as you showed the video, because we have to remember when we look at stats and numbers and charts, we have to remember like they're real human beings behind this. That this is what makes all the work worth it. So here's kids having an experience out in water. This was from an Outward Bound program, actually in Massachusetts. We give out awards every year. So if you run a program that's over the summer, please apply for our National Summer Learning Awards. You get attention, you get some money, but we get to hold you up as a best practice. So there are some great programs all across the country that are just giving kids new experiences they wouldn't be exposed to otherwise. So we go to the next slide. So I'm just going to say a few ways, and if you've been on webinars with me, you might be hearing me saying this a couple times, but just for you all to just, as you frame why summer matters. And by the way, everything that we talk about in the summer, the reason COVID-19 has kind of magnified it. So all the inequities that we see in summer are exacerbated in the moment in time we're in. But the thing about summer is it's a time of inequity, but it's also a great time of opportunity. And that's what's so exciting about it. And so when we think about summer, we think it's an under-leveraged time for sure, but it is a time for improvement. It's that one time historically, pre-COVID, it's that chance, not only for students, by the way, summer learning is also for adults. And if you think about educators, although most professional development they get is over the summer. It's when they get to hone their craft. Just like we want kids to, find their strengths and passions, but also work on their areas of weakness that they need to improve upon. It's also this time of innovation. All of you are innovative entrepreneurial educators. I think if you are one, you're drawn to summer. There's more flexibility, you have more time, you do things on weekends, you might be able to do things overnight, you have more hours, you could do things that are a little bit outside the bounds of the core school day to be a little more creative. And as a result, a lot of new innovative programs start out as a summer program. Before you want to, roll something out school district-wide, school-wide, statewide, typically you would like to test it out and you have enough time to get the data on that. The other thing, and I'm going to make this point over, is that I call this, it's a time for integration. So these are my 4 eyes, so that's how I can remember it. I call them the eyes of summer. And the third eye stands for integration. This is something, Beth, you've been amazing at, Bethany, as well, where there's a chance to bring all the different domains, and I would call them artificial silos in education, whether it's the school day, the after-school program, the summer program, the summer youth employment, the internship worlds, all these groups and all these different organizations that we always want them to work together, and they even want to work together, but no one has time typically. And once the school year starts, forget it, the train's left the station. But summer gives people usually a chance to kind of test out, model, and practice partnerships. And I think this moment of crisis, Beth was just saying it earlier, is bringing everyone together. This is an all hands on deck moment. Everyone needs to partner. And the last I is for impact, and that's the impact you and all know you're having every day. But what's fun about experiential learning, and this was something I always loved about it, is that it's immediate and it's lasting. So all of us, if you were in a summer program 25 years ago and you did something, you learned to water ski or surf or built a, a bird, anything, did any hands-on project, you will have learned a skill in that moment, but you could still remember it years later. And that's a real unique power that we get to practice in summer. It's also, it sets us up. So it's not just 10 weeks, 8, 10, 12 weeks in the summer, but it sets us up for success over the school year, we know. And overall, we're most focused on the low-income kids in America, which is about 20 million students on the free and reduced lunch program. And so middle and upper middle class families will find great opportunities and experiences for their kids over the summer. So that 20 million collectively, that is a solvable challenge. This doesn't have to be, there are a lot of problems in America that we can't feel intractable, that we might not be able to solve them. But this is one that we could possibly cross off America's to-do list. So I just like to put that out there. This doesn't have to be for eternity that there's always these, summer learning loss problems. We know what good programs look like. We know where the kids are. We know where the good staff are. And we even know where the funding is. It's about connecting dots and making that happen. So we can go on the next slide, please. So I'm just going to put this up front because if you remember nothing else, what's going on in the world of COVID, remember these points. This is a time to be hyper creative. You're all creative, but whatever we've done in the past is not going to be working and necessarily applicable for the moment we're in and maybe going forward. So this is a time to be creative. I can give you examples. Here's one, Charlotte, North Carolina. There's summer youth employment programs for teenagers all across America, usually run by the mayor's offices. A lot of places getting canceled. In Charlotte, there's a woman named Dawn Hill. She had 6,000 teenagers looking for jobs, paid jobs that matter to their families for these kids to get paid. Instead of saying I'm going to shut down because the kids don't have a place to go and the companies don't want to, she negotiated with all the companies, all the placeholders, and then said, listen, I know you might not be able to take them right now. Would you still be willing to pay them if we train them in Microsoft skill program like Excel and Suite programs and got them certified on LinkedIn Learning and all these things? And then hopefully when the virus subsides, you could have them working for you at the end of the summer or into the fall. And they said, yes, we want to help those kids. We'll do that. So it's just about a little out of the box thinking is helping thousands of kids. And I just kind of hold that as an example. Also time to be hyper collaborative. We're very well organized in the education youth development fields. And we know where our people are. And we get together with them all the time. But now is the time to look outside and with our peripheral vision and across the street. And if you are looking for space, have you called the library? And if none of us, I like to say, none of us have all the answers, but collectively we do. And so just to give you an example, in Pennsylvania, there's this great program called Teachers in the Parks. And this guy, Matthew Hathaway, gets certified teachers who then sit on blankets under trees and teach reading to kids. And they do this whole thing in these parks that are empty in the summer. And it's just about doing the asset mapping that you all know. Like what's available. You got some parks departments with 1,000 vans that are sitting empty right now. You have libraries with books that no one's reading right now. You have kids at home. People are struggling. And so it's up to the leaders on this call and in our communities to kind of find those resources, connect dots, hyper collaborative. Now, high tech and low tech. We'll talk a lot about this. We just did a webinar on virtual learning. We've all had to jump into the kind of online learning with different levels of success and experience. But one thing that I know is that the culture, that we have in person doesn't have to go away. And the people the examples and programs that are doing well are kind of bringing like that enthusiasm still to a virtual world in different ways. And that you could do things that are real world and virtual combined. So there, you could have people drive by the kids' houses and say, hey, it's time to get online. And you could see a lot. There's one woman in South Carolina is running parades for kids and just trying to keep the spirit, because otherwise, in LA right now, 30% of their students, no one knows where they are. They're not even showing up for online classes. So just because we make things online doesn't mean people show up for it and doesn't mean it's engaging. We have to figure out how to do that, which gets me to the last piece is about relationships. We all know this work is relationship-based. Everything we want to do is dependent on how well caring adults can connect with kids. One example of a tech version that also combines with the relationship is out of Southern New Hampshire University, one of the more successful online, they're a real college, but they have a very successful online program with one of the highest graduation rates of online colleges. And one of the reasons they're able to do that is they hire a gazillion adults to be kind of life coaches and who sit on the phone and call every student. Every online student gets a real human being to call in and check in with them and talk to them and encourage them to show up and to hear their problems and to help them think through it. And that's how come they're able. So it's like real relationships supporting the online learning. We could go to the next slide. There's a lot of data here. We have on our website, summerlearning.org, a whole resource center, and this is some of it, some are by the numbers. I think you could all know, but summer is a time, this goes back to the inequities. Hunger is a huge issue in the summer, the parents are working, they're struggling. It's a time for lack of physical activity for a lot of young people who don't have access to programs. And then we get into the academic learning loss we're going to talk about as well. So there's a lot of reasons why we need to do it. Working parents need it. And you know what we're having right now is I call this our empathetic aha moment, because now with middle and upper middle class families stuck at home trying to work and manage their kids and getting them online, they're all calling us saying, is this what happens to low income families in the summer? Like, is this how hard it is? And you say, yes. And they're like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Can you imagine? And these are some of the issues we've been tackling for 25 years. But I think all of us should take some bizarre comfort in that what we care about day in, day out, the rest of the world now has a little insight into like the challenges that we're all tackling. Go to the next slide. Okay, so this is summer learning. This is a slide that kind of tells one story around summer learning loss, and you can just see it. Basically, you know, during the year, maybe not at the same rate, but students, low income, higher income students, they're all increasing their learning, but then it's always the summer where, you know, it's almost Darwinian, like we were describing before, where middle and upper middle class kids get to go to camps and all these great experiences, museums and trips and da-da-da, and they keep learning in whether fun ways, disguised ways, and then they come back ready to learn, having connected some dots to what they learned in school, to the outside world. And for too many low-income students, they don't, and they fall behind. And also the research showed that those learning losses were cumulative. So by fifth grade, you're almost 2.5 years potentially behind, and it builds on itself. So that was one of the key issues our organization has been designed to focus on. Go to the next slide. So we talked about achievement gap, and then we just talked about opportunity gap. And you know all this stuff, but this is an old chart, but even it just shows you know how much money people are spending without blinking or thinking for their kids to go do and have great experiences. And if you benefited from that, you know it. And if you have children, you want your children to have it as well. I joke that the New York Times newspaper runs a program in the summer, a summer learning program where kids, for I think it might be $6,000 for 2 weeks, you could send your kid to New York City to live in the dorms at NYU and follow reporters around and learn how to be a reporter. That's an amazing opportunity. That's great. And a lot of kids are getting them, and people are dying to do that. And then we have kids with less resources who don't get those kinds of experiences. So you see it adds up on the dollar side, the SAT prep, all the different, the unpaid internship is a pet peeve of mine. That is a totally discriminatory, horrible thing. Because if you're a low-income kid, you will never, very rarely be able to afford that. And especially in DC, when to work for your member of Congress, you have to be able to do that. So you're never going to have people from diverse or low-income communities getting into certain fields because they can't access these opportunities. So these are the kinds of things that we're trying to address. Keep going. Next slide. All right. These are Beth slides. So I give Beth all the credit. I talk about it. It's NWEA. Your name should be on there. It is. So don't think I'm trying to take credit for anything. This is all Beth's work. She has been doing great work to kind of project out what the COVID-19 learning losses could be. And we just wanted to make those cases to other people. I forgot that Beth was going to be joining us, so we don't need it. So we'll skip it. We'll hear from her later. Skip the next one. And let me just, again, here's just a list of the real dilemmas and inequities that we're seeing, okay? First of all, let's recognize real trauma is happening in this country. More than 100,000 people have died, which means 100,000 people's family members are suffering and all their networks. And you, by the way, you can't visit them in the hospital. You can not even stand next to your loved ones at a funeral. I mean, there are things going on in this country that we have to take a breath and think through and support people through. I've already talked about the aha moment. We have a digital divide issue. that you all know about. Technical, people racing to get online. They don't have access to computers. They might not have access to the internet. So we have those issues. Some of you might be familiar with the summer melt. There's great research on that. But I just want to make sure you know about that, which is the issue of students getting into college their senior year, but not having anyone support them over the summer. So then they don't show up for college in the fall. So that's an issue when you think about that. Food insecurity, hunger issues, we've talked about, you've all tried to address that. Nature deficit disorder, I know all of you love nature out there. It's so important and critical that kids get to be outside, and it has academic repercussions as well. So if everyone's locked at home, are people getting those opportunities? We got to make sure. Healthcare challenges. If you're an English language learner, a lot of this online learning is not translated for you. It's not translated for your families. I mean, the list of needs and challenges are huge. And if you're a special needs student, so it goes on. And everything COVID-19 has done is put a magnifying glass and exacerbated it. If you could go to the next slide. But here's some of the solutions going on, and I would love to let others talk about this as well. But just one thing that you should know about in one of the CARES Act that was passed, feels like 10 years ago, but the money that was being passed along to the states and to the school districts, there was a specific call out for summer and after school that school districts, hopefully from the state down to the districts, an allowable use is for summer programs. So you should know that. Same with the governor's money that governors would be getting. We are running a Voices of Summer webinar series where we're trying to find examples of people doing great programs and models that you can learn from. And we've been doing on every topic. We do the recordings are on our website, and we have a new one, every other day. The NBA, the Basketball Association, has created curriculum for kids. There are so many resources out there. Whether you know about them, that's another challenge. So we're doing staff trainings. We're bringing leaders together. We have a summer, and the phrase we use is continuous learning. So, yes, we're talking about summer, but we could all come back in September, and there could be a flare-up and an outbreak. We could all be out of school again for 3 months. So, again, summer is almost a metaphor for what it means to be out of school. And that's what we're talking about right now. So we're calling the summer and continuous learning. We have a task force, 25 national groups. They're putting together a playbook that we will make available to all of you shortly. People who have different niche expertise. Some people know a lot about family engagement, technology, communications, marketing, program quality, fundraising. And instead of all of you having to go to 40 different websites, we're trying to put it all together and make that available. One of the ways that we get more support for all our work is through National Summer Learning Week in July. You'll hear more information about that. That's a chance to bring awareness to the media and to policymakers. And we're going to try and do a fundraising campaign to pass through money. The economic slowdown is real. Companies are going away. JCPenney just went bankrupt. I mean, this is upside down. This is upending our world. And we're going to have to find a way to get more resources to people. The need is greater and the dollars are less. So how are we going to make that work? And we have to be creative on that side. We're also going to be running a national marketing campaign to raise awareness for the work you're all doing and bring attention to these issues. You on the next slide? So ultimately, here we are. It's May 28th. Sometimes you might be in a situation where someone says, well, what do I do with my kid? At the end of the day, there are lots of great programs and resources, and we want to make them all available. But if you're talking to a parent who's like, I don't know what to do, here's an answer. Focus on getting healthy. Find a way, whether it's learning how to eat healthier or be more active, right? Pick one academic area. Math, for sure, and Beth's work will show us, is more school dependent and harder for parents to support at home. Literacy, a little bit easier, but talk to your teachers. What do your kids need? What is the area they need to help with? And how can you find the resources to hone in? You're not going to be able to catch up. We're not going to be able to catch up on everything we've missed, but pick the biggest weak spot that needs improvement and hone in. And if it's college application process and support, test prep if you're older, do that. Gain a skill. Here we are. People are saying, what do I do? I say, get a skill. Apple is running programs to teach people, young kids, how to be app developers. You can learn that. You will make a lot of money in life. It's like, here's our chance. There's some things online, and you can figure that out. But find your passion, find a skill. Last two, find or be a mentor. The relationship piece is huge. There are millions of college kids who are home right now who don't have what to do and would love to be a big brother or big sister or be a mentor. There are people who have been laid off right now, who have had great careers, who would love to mentor. And part of our work is like find those people and bring them into contact with our kids so they have role models. And the last thing, something you all do is like serve others. And let's just tell our kids, this is a crisis. Some of it we're all suffering, but there is more need than can be met. And all of us have a way to contribute. So you all know the ways to plug people into service in your community. So I would highly recommend that. We can give examples of how to do all of this later on. Next slide. And then this is Matthew's book. I don't know if we're going to give him more time later or not, but when we think about resources, Matthew has just written a great book that we're going to be making available to lots of folks. Matthew, do you want to say a word about it?
Yeah, thanks. It's nice to see the cover because I just finished writing it last night about 1 a.m. So it is hot off the press. But it really tries to do two things for parents. One is create a framework for sort of big picture thinking for parents to approach this particular summer. I had a conversation with a mother a few years ago that I've been thinking about, and she was the mother of a second grader, and she said, I want my daughter to have a good summer, but what does that even mean? And I thought that question right now is sort of more important than ever. What does it mean to have a good summer, the summer of COVID-19? So it is really a whole child approach. And I certainly talk about learning in the broadest way possible. That's the picture framing. And the second is very hands-on activities through digital learning for parents to support their kids, mostly elementary and middle. But I have a high schooler, and she's found some stuff in there that interests her. But that second part of the book is really meant to be hands-on. It's an ebook, largely because there's a lot of digital learning embedded in the chapters, and because no one can go to a bookstore these days and buy a book. So it'll be available on Amazon next week. But I'm really putting it out there very quickly and hoping to get some feedback, because I think this question of what do parents really need is one that institutionally we haven't invested in. We just haven't invested in our parents the ways that we should. And so I hope that this is as Aaron says, kind of an aha moment or a wake up moment, where we're realizing that we're more dependent on ever on parents for learning. And we have to think as program providers, as school districts, as state and local policymakers, we have to think about new ways to really connect with, support parents. And so I hope this is the beginning of us trying to learn about that. Thanks, Bethany.
Yeah, I think Aaron just had those last slides.
But we could skip. This is just more about resources we have on our website. And you can go to the next slide. And just things coming up. We talk about Summer Learning Week. We talk about the awards. We have a conference that is scheduled to be in November. It'll likely have to be postponed since people can't gather and fly. But that typically is something we will reschedule and a chance for you to get together with all our peers and learn and share with one another. So thank you all very much. Happy to talk offline and answer questions later. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. And the slides and all the links will be shared with everyone. There's also some that I've already put in the chat box for you to start perusing. So I did want to we're going to hand it off, and Beth will share her slides with us now. And if you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat box, and we can get to those as soon as possible.
Great. Can folks see my screen okay, the slides? Wonderful. So I thought I'd give just a little background on how we came to this project, as well as the organization I represent. So NWEA is based out of Portland, but we're a national organization, and we're most known for our assessments. We're a nonprofit, and we give assessments in the primary subjects, so math and reading, language arts, and science. We assess about 12 million kids across the country, so we have a pretty big footprint. We're assessing almost 1 in 4 kids in the United States, as well as Portland Public Schools and some others in the state of Oregon. And part of the nonprofit status, and I'm a researcher, so as the EVP of research, I take that nonprofit status really seriously. Not only does that kind of guide our financial reinvestments, but it also calls us to reinvest our data in really important ways. And I think this project represents that quite well. So, I don't know if folks have read Vivian Singh. She's at William T. Grant Foundation. She just did a blog post about kind of this call to action about evidence-informed practices. And she spoke to, I think, a lot of my colleagues in the sense of, we can't wait. The classic academic response for this kind of work is to think about a study and find out the results in 1 to 2 years. And like I said before, we work with 12 million kids. That wasn't good enough for us. And so how can we draw on prior evidence, so yesterday's evidence, to really inform today's decisions? We won't have the luxury to wait a couple years to know what's working in the space of education. And so that moral imperative really drives a lot of the work. And so I'm going to be presenting a project that I hope represents that line of thinking. So Megan Kuhfeld is a colleague of mine, and she's done a lot of work actually with Carl Alexander, as well as some other folks like Doug Downey, who've done research in the space of seasonal learning, to examine what kids learn both during the school year and potentially some of those losses that we see in the summer months. And so the project here that had, you stole my thunder, Erin, with the graphs, but I'll elaborate a little bit more, represents some work that we did with about 5 million kids. And so we looked at how kids are typically performing in the school year. And this is based on 2017 and 2018 data. And so the first slide here represents the reading results. And so we know that, COVID isn't a perfect parallel to summer, but it gives us some proxy of how kids learn in kind of typical or normal conditions. And so the solid line represents actual real data, 5 million kids in grades 3 through 8. So this is the trajectory over the school year where you see a slope going up through the school year and then slight declines in the summer, also known as the summer slide or the summer slowdown. And then we did 2 hypothetical scenarios. So the first is the dashed line, and that represents what we called a COVID slowdown. And so for simplicity's sake, we marked March 15th as a school closure date when a good part of the brick and mortar buildings across the country were closed. And so if we assume kids came back in the school year, again, with some assumptions that we're going to be back fully in the fall, with more or less the level of achievement they had when schools closed, what would that look like? And so some people have been calling this the Pollyanna hypothesis, kind of under best case scenario, kids more or less stagnate over these 6 months of closure. And so we also did a COVID slide scenario. And you'll notice the slide here, that's the dotted line, represents the slope that we see in observed data in those summer months, and we walk that back to March 15th. So real observed slope, but extend it back 3 months. So here, the projections in reading on average would predict that kids would return in the fall with about 70% of the learning gains we would see under typical conditions. We did the same scenario for math, and these were a bit bleaker as Erin previewed as well. So in math, we see kind of a greater slope both in the school year, but also a greater slope of decline in the summer months. So here, 5 million kids, real data is the solid line, real data in terms of their loss as well in the summer. And we did those 2 hypotheticals, the slowdown or the stagnation hypothesis, and then the COVID slides hypothesis, where we walk that slope back to March 15th. So for math, these predictions are quite a bit bleaker, where we see kids returning with about 50% of the typical learning gains we would see under normal conditions, and in some grades, almost a full grade level behind. I put in a couple additional slides here, just kind of real-time data on what we're also learning, because we give a lot of caveats that the COVID slides predictions are that they're predictions, and we hope that they're overestimating slide and where learning may come back in the fall. But we also know that based on a variety of economic conditions, that this is likely going to impact some of our more historically marginalized communities disproportionately. As Erin mentioned, exacerbating inequalities that have long pre-existed COVID. So I wanted to contextualize a couple things that we're also seeing, and because we're not collecting data, at least at NWEA, about what's happening on the ground in schools, there are folks that are, and so I wanted to highlight a couple of those resources. And so the Center for Reinventing Public Education, housed at a UW, is tracking what districts are doing. And so they have both at the school level as well as the district level at a national scale. And so this is giving some idea of what's been happening over the last couple months, where school districts have moved somewhat from a triage mode, if you'll say. So trying to get lunches to kids, trying to get one-to-one devices, figuring out how to move everything to virtual and remote instruction. Are they providing curriculum, paper and pencil, or virtual electronic? Who's documenting attendance? How are we looking at grading? Are we doing pass-fail? So they're collecting a lot of this evidence, but we're moving somewhat from that initial triage phase to more districts implementing some level of formal instruction, sometimes asynchronous, sometimes not, and also progress monitoring tools. But to Erin's point earlier, a lot of this is we're tracking what we're doing, what we're pushing out, but not necessarily the reception on the other side of what kids are doing, what they're learning. How does this compare to kind of normal conditions, and also social-emotional learning and other types of measures that are really important. I also wanted to highlight some of the more recent work coming out about the digital divide. We know that low-income homes are less likely to have devices, and it's also important to think about kind of the one-to-one, meaning is there one device per household? So some households have multiple kids and are sharing that device. So even under kind of the best conditions of digital access efforts, and we know that that includes internet providers and districts really doing some heroic efforts, but also knowing that that doesn't necessarily reduce all the divides that we have beyond the digital access and Wi-Fi. And so this shows that this is by income level, household income level, that kids are much more likely to have internet access the more affluent the family is. Again, not probably surprising to the folks on this call. But I bring that partially because what does this mean actually when we talk about these predictions? And it was interesting we're working with Carl Alexander as well as Doug, and everyone has their hypotheses. Like, is summer a good proxy for understanding what happens in the COVID slowdown? And I think at first people were kind of like, okay, maybe we're overestimating these. But as time has been progressing and just I'm a parent and I'm trying to teach on the side and my kid's in front of Khan Academy downstairs right now. And, it's tough under the best circumstances with double income, working families. We're not trying to get food on the table. And we're all somewhat feeling like failures, right? Or like that it's just really tough. And so what does that mean when some families can put the acceleration on social and cultural capital to potentially give some advantages, and a lot of other families are really scrambling to make needs and have additional stressors than they would have under normal circumstances, or when school or after school programming or summer interventions can be relief from some of the inequities that we have in our homes and our communities. And so we have kind of these varying hypotheses of sort of how bad or how bleak these projections might be. But they're also a bit of a call to action, saying, we need to think about the long game. And we have parallels in absenteeism literature. We have parallels in inclement weather and what we learned post-Katrina that suggests that some of the patterns that we are putting forward replicate in other data sets and under other closure scenarios. And so we tend to see math is impacted a bit more than reading. That's partially because of not only the summer slide, but also the lack of those really critical instruction months, the last 3 months of the year here. And it is a bit more difficult for families sometimes to provide resources as it is in mathematics or in science or in the STEM fields that it might be in reading and continuing to have shared reading amongst family members. But when we think about how this plays out differently, potentially for families, I thought it was also important to think about the variation impact. So because of the spread, and this is always an issue that we have come fall with teachers trying to figure out how to differentiate their class and meet the needs of some kids who may be already reading on grade level, some kids well above, some well below. But now you're sitting next to a kid who may have had no instruction for 6 months, may have had fewer meals than they would normally have, next to a kid whose family may have more resources, potentially even greater gains than they would under normal circumstances. And they're sitting next to each other, well, maybe 6 feet apart this year, but potentially, this idea that we're serving multiple needs of kids that are likely exacerbated. And so this last slide, or the last graph I'm presenting, represents that variation. So the solid line is the real data, again, from the same data set. But if we break this up by achievement level, so the top 75th, the average, and then the 25th percentile, this is for 6th and 4th grade in reading, we see really the divergence. You can imagine similar patterns potentially by socioeconomic background as well. And so these, the idea that COVID is going to parallel summer is a yes, but I think response if you want to have a kind of an informed research-based projection. A few other things. This came out of the Education Trust. They did a survey of parents, and I thought it was pretty interesting also to think about the role of families now. And Aaron talked about this before, that parents are really activated in their students or in their kids' education in new ways. And I think that's also a silver lining here about how do we connect with families in a more purposeful way. Some of the concerns that they're raising, these are rank ordered. So academic support is the primary concern that parents are having right now. Digital divide and distant learning, access to curriculum, as well as the socio-emotional well-being of kids and meeting those supports. So those were the top 3 identified by parents. These are some of the considerations that NWEA is putting forward, and then I'm going to end with some on the CRPE group is putting forward as well, because I think those are evidence-based that particularly might be of interest to the folks on the call today. So for NWEA, clearly we're an assessment organization, so we have skin in the game. We believe it's important to measure where kids are when they return, to have an idea of how do we find resources, how do we provide out of school time, where's the one-to-one tutoring and the mentorship, and who needs it the most. And so it'll be really important to have those measures, but they're not to replace the real critical nature of teachers and the role of educators in this, and also thinking about, after we're in triage and we're thinking about restart plans, and ODE sends out guidelines about social distancing and others, how do we plan to close the learning gaps? And thinking about the long game, I mean, I was living in Atlanta when Katrina hit, and we had a bunch of kids relocate at the time, and Doug Harris's company tracked that out of Tulane, both in Houston and in Atlanta, and those kids took 2 to 3 years to recoup the losses that they had at that time. And so imagining kind of Katrina to scale here, that this is going to be more than just a year recovery. We have to think about multiple years. We have to think about that out of school time really, really purposefully, and surrounding kids with learning opportunities that are engaging, not just kind of heavy hitting academic. We have to think about the social emotional needs as well. And really the piece that we're working with districts now is the strategic restart plans. So thinking about professional learning for their teachers. How do you do that virtually? How do we optimize the summertime, not just for kids, but for the adults in the systems to better support the kids when they return? The last slide that I was going to share today is just some recent recommendations that are research-based out of the CRPE, which I thought was pretty interesting too. They do an explicit call out about summer learning, which I was really pleased to see. So they talk about kind of the wraparound model, that it's going to take the adults and families in the community to really lock arms here in new and targeted ways to collaborate to really make up some ground for these kids. And there's a silver lining that this may equip us to think about our kids more collectively in ways that we haven't in the past. And I think that's something that's a real hope and ambition for those of us in the equity space. So they recommend kind of 5 major points here. So one being tutors to help develop skills and knowledge to progress, hopefully, to the next grade level as efficiently as possible. Quality summer learning for students and professional developments for teachers. They also have a call out how to use Title I and special education funding for that work. They pay attention to the transitions, and I'm glad Aaron brought that up earlier too. So thinking about college and career and the move into the university or community college spaces, as well as the career side. So thinking about industry and trade unions and how this may shake up how we've done things in the past. Thinking about compensatory special education services, so our kids who have 504s or IEPs in particular, our ELL kids, are lacking not just potentially the access to the resources in ways that are not random, but also resources, special instruction, potentially devices, Braille screen readers, et cetera, that they may not have, or limited access in the home. So those kids are a particular risk of falling further behind. And then the last, again, speaks to this idea of diagnostic and data systems that can help us better understand, and also, I would argue, better measure recovery if we start thinking about recouping gains. So I'll go ahead and pause there. I don't know if we want to save questions for the end, or I'm happy to talk about the research more specifically.
Does anyone want to raise their hand or unmute for a question for Beth? Right, like you can't wait to get your question answered. Otherwise, you are welcome to save them for the end. But wait a moment for any unmuting. Thank you, Beth. I think, and I shared these slides out, but I also might encourage if there are other questions that come up, can people reach out to you, or is there a good way to follow up on how else we can share out this valuable information?
Yeah, I'll throw in a couple resources in the link to the full research paper if people are interested, and then I'll drop my email in there too. People, by all means, can reach out to me directly.
Wonderful, thanks. So I just want to note, we'll transition here. We do have 2 more friends from the American Camp Association who were able to join. So Katie, if you want to reshare your screen for right now, and I'll note that there were a number of questions that came through during the sign up form for this webinar. And so I want people to be mindful. We did see those, and there's a couple slides that will have some reference and hope to answer some of those questions as well. But I want to make sure that we give our ACA friends time to share some of what they have been hard at work doing, and go ahead and pass it off for them to introduce themselves and let them share their screen and expertise with you.
Great, thank you very much. My name is Henry DeHart. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the American Camp Association. I appreciate you letting us come and have a minute of your time, and hopefully we will be able to give you some resources that support the great work that you are doing. I'm going to let Michelle introduce herself, and then we'll kind of give you a quick overview on what we hope to share.
Hi, I'm Michelle Brinkenier. I'm the Western Region Director, so I have the great pleasure of working with all of the folks in Oregon. I'm glad to be here today.
Great. So what we thought that we could do is, one, just do a quick overview about the resources and the guidance that's out there for you guys, just so that you're aware of everything that's out there. You may already be aware of some of this. I'll show you on my screen. I think that Gretchen, you probably should introduce yourself as well. Sorry about that. Are you on the call? Would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm here. I'm Gretchen Troop. I'm the Director of Membership from the American Camp Association, and I'm just their backup. I'm going to put links in the chat for them. I'm glad that you invited us. Thanks for having us here.
Absolutely. Thank you, Gretchen. So thanks. She'll feed some links so that you can find this stuff. So real quickly, I'll do a kind of a national overview of information that's out there. Michelle can do a little bit on a local, and then we really like to spend the time finding out how we can provide information that's helpful to you. And so if some of you have had a chance to review this material, might have come with questions, we can jump right into specific questions. If they're not specific questions at this point, I can give you an overview of some high points, but I want to make sure that this is focused on information that is useful to you. So that's kind of our plan, and just let us know if that didn't work. Okay, so let me real quickly share this. Oh, that's not the one I was going to share. Let me try again. Nope. All right. I'm going to try this differently. Hold on. Okay, there. Can you see it now? Great. So you may be aware that the CDC has put out several things over the last couple of weeks, and we just wanted to point them out and let you know how they work in conjunction with our materials. And also there are a couple of recent updates, very recent updates that I can share with you as well. So initially, the first official thing, there were some unofficial drafts that were circulated that got held up, and the CDC pivoted and went in another direction. And this was the first official thing that was posted around youth programs and camps. And this is what they call a decision-making tool. And so this is a framework that you walk through in order to assess whether or not it makes the most sense for you to run in-person programs. And we approach this with the recognition that that answer is going to be different for different organizations in different locations based on program design, on what's happening locally, on the availability of equipment and medical support at different types of programs. So many people are making choices now to operate in in-person programs, both day and residential, and many people are making the choice, given this type of decision-making framework, not to. And so this kind of is very high level, and it walks you through the rationale of how to make decisions to determine if it might make sense to consider offering in-person program. So two things to know about this. One is that it exists, and we'll post the link for you. And the two is that the resources that ACA have developed line up almost exactly with each of these checkboxes. So let me talk about that for just a second. We recognized several months ago that even if the CDC were to provide more detailed guidance than this, which they have, and we'll talk about that in a minute, that it was likely that camps and other youth-serving organizations would need more specific information in order to figure out how to operationalize their guidance. Our main example there was during the H1N1 issue in 2009. Their guidance was very high level, and we were assuming that it would be similar to that. So we went ahead prior to any of this coming out, and we hired an environmental health consulting company called Environmental Health and Engineering out of Boston. They work in this space. They've done work with the CDC. They do work with other national organizations and then also local organizations, and have worked with specific states as well. They put together a panel of experts that include physicians with connections to the American Academy of Pediatrics, the nurses from the Association of Nursing, public health experts, epidemiologists. They had a panel of experts that included the Harvard Business School of Health, the Harvard School of Health had representation, and they essentially developed a what we call the field guide for camps in operationalizing CDC guidance, and so it's the field guide. It takes each of these areas and goes into more detail, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But the point here is to know how ours and the CDC's is different, and then also to understand that they're very heavily aligned. So we've been in great conversations with the CDC for the past several months. We do wish that their information for camps had come out sooner, but they've got a lot on their plate. And so our materials and their materials are very heavily aligned. And so that's the first resource to be aware of. Let me stop sharing that, and I will share this. So the second thing that came out is this. This is on the CDC website, and this is considerations for youth in summer camps. And so this is a more detailed walkthrough of principles to keep in mind. So originally, the CDC was going to put out guidance that was more prescriptive. You've probably read about this in the paper. And there was a disagreement with the White House, and they've pivoted, and now they're posting these things called practical considerations. And they framed this as they have put these materials out there to facilitate a dialogue between youth-serving organizations and their state and local health authorities to determine the best way to move forward in camping. So there are a few pieces in this that seem to not line up exactly with other conversations that we have been having. And they had an interim piece that I think is still out there called Activities and Initiatives Supporting the Opening of America. And the decision-making tool and the activities and initiatives were very much in line with things we've been talking about. There were a few things here that did not line up exactly, but they were mostly at this end section where they talk about overnight camps. So somewhere in here, special considerations for overnight camps. So I don't know that that would apply to you guys that much. We won't go into those details unless that's helpful. We actually had a phone call. His office reached out to us last week. We had a phone call with 30 different stakeholders from the camping industry with Vice President Pence today. His kids went to camp. Dr. Burks, who was also on the call, went to camp. They were concerned about camp because it's been in the media so much, and they wanted to hear our concerns specifically. So we had a scheduled 30-minute call that went on for 50 minutes because he was on a roll and he opened it up for lots of questions. And so we were able to frame lots of concerns with him, and he was very responsive. But one was that the language around this considerations for overnight camp, and they framed it as this was simply meant to not be a requirement, but to be considerations in the conversation you have with your state and local folks. They're going to go back and consider changing some language, actually, and we'll see if that happens or not. So good news that folks that are making decisions are concerned about youth serving programs. And we can go into more details of that if that's helpful. So that's the second thing that I wanted to show that's out there. And then the last one, and then I'll take a breath and I'll let, hold on one second, it's thinking, and I'll let Michelle give a little detail. So ACA, this is our resource page, our COVID-19 resource page. It is free and open to anyone, to you guys, to the general public. It is not under a member wall. You don't have to be a member. It's got a number of different resources that are all categorized here. And so you can go in, you can see what learning's coming up. If you're thinking about business models, we just posted some mental health resources. But this is the what I was specifically talking about, which is our field guide for camps on implementation of CDC guidance. So there are 12 chapters, and you can download the whole field guide, or you can go to each chapter if you're just looking for one specific piece of information. And this is available out there for any of you that are thinking about how to operate in-person programs. This is meant to be a resource for you. The one thing to note about this, aside from the fact that it aligns with the CDC guidance, is that this is meant to be a living document. And as new information becomes available, we have engaged our consultants through the end of the summer so that they could monitor the situation that was happening throughout the summer and update this. We all know that information is coming out very rapidly, so they could update this resource with any new information or new thinking that comes out. And so there's a whole section in here around the Kawasaki-like disease that's emerged a little bit and it's getting a lot of press. There's a specific piece of information there about that, and that'll probably get updated as more information becomes available. And so those are our resources, and I'm happy to go into details. We'll spend kind of the second chunk of our time seeing if you have specific questions, having looked at either the CDC guidance or our resources. If they're not questions, I'm happy to give you lift out a couple of key points that might be relevant for you, but I'd rather spend the time where you'd like to spend it. But first, so that's kind of a national resources that are out there. One other one is, because we have 3 different physicians that have a connection to the AAP, the American Academy of Pediatrics, on our expert panel. The AAP is actually considering putting out a piece as well, and we don't know the timeline on that or if that will actually happen. But they were thinking that having a resource that gives parents confidence that the leading authority around pediatric medicine did see in some circumstances a safe path forward for in-person programming might be helpful. So that may be coming out, although we don't know what the timeline is. So let me pause there. Let me kick it to Michelle, and then we can ask questions about what resources are out there, and then we can jump into the content if that's helpful. And Bethany, you just redirect us if we need to go in a different direction.
That sounds great. Thanks, Henry. I am going to, Bethany, can I have permission to share my screen?
Yes, let me.
Thank you. That's okay.
Should be able to now.
Great. Okay. I hope everyone can see the Oregon specific health authority guidance that was prepared for school-age summertime day camps. At this time, Michelle Copeland with Benai Birth is working with a group of stakeholders and the governor's office to get guidance for resident camps. So at this time, our understanding is that resident camps are not able to operate. I don't know how much that affects this group, but I just want you to know that there's a group that's working on that, and I'm happy to share her contact information if anybody would like to be involved in that group. I think the guidance for Oregon day camps is pretty lenient, as I read through them and have looked at them the past, since they came out. And again, this afternoon, I looked at them before this meeting, and there's a lot of allowance for things that perhaps aren't allowed in other states or counties. So, and some of our states are county by county, but as Henry shared, the field guide, I think, provides the greatest amount of information based on expertise related to camp operations. But in here, in addition to the specific categories, and I'm happy to share this link with anyone with the group, I did give it to Gresham to put the attachment in the chat box. But at the bottom, please be sure that you look at the resources that they're providing, and that you pay attention to. One of the things they talk about is if you do operate your program in a state park or another facility that has specific guidance from the state, just be sure to look at both so that you're following the rules all the way. And that's pretty much it. I'm not going to read for you all. I know that you all have been in a lot of COVID training lately. I think this guidance is excellent. And perhaps there are a few questions, and I'm happy to answer any if I can.
So this is Beth, and we have been fielding a lot of calls with the governor's office, and I think the biggest confusion is which slot where do I fit? Am I a camp? Am I a school age licensed program, exempt? We have something called recorded programs. Then we have,
Wow.
and we found out today that OSHA actually oversees something which the governor's office didn't even know. So, it's going to help do some systems building here over the next 6 months, and maybe will last forever. So we've definitely seen some of the gaps that we have in our systems.
Thank you for sharing that, Beth. That's really important to know.
And we did have several questions that had come up, some kind of general questions around like, how do you address distancing with kids that aren't going to be distant? And then there were some specific, guidance questions that I think that I've got some reference to in our slides. But if you have suggestions, and I know that as I've perused the field guide, it's absolutely beneficial in giving some of that practical, well, here's what you might try, to all of these guidance measures that don't necessarily give you a lot of specifics on what it is you're going to do.
Would you like me to jump in and I can talk just a little bit about that one point, or does that help?
Yeah, I think that would be great.
So the guidance is built around an idea that comes from the public health sector. That's a pretty well established idea called concentric circles of immunization protection. And so the guidance recognizes, both from the CDC and the resources from ACA, recognize that there are going to be challenges with distancing as we go back to some form of life where we all went into lockdown. And they're thinking about camps, but they're also thinking about childcare, and they're thinking about school in the fall. And they're recognizing that if you get a bunch of 8-year-olds together, especially in an outdoor setting, you're not likely to keep them 6 feet apart all the time. And so the model is called, it's a cohorting model. So you essentially develop a cohort of the smallest possible number of students or campers at one time. And many states are focused on the number 10 because in the early phases, a lot of states have used 10 as the no larger than groups. As states move into phases where you have gatherings of 50, and then in later stages gatherings of 150 or 250, there's still a recommendation that when you're doing these youth programs that you keep those small cohorts intact. And we call them in our guideline households. So essentially what you're doing is you're moving from having just a household that you shelter in place with at home to a household you now shelter in place with at the program that you go to during the day, being a school, being a camp, whatever it happens to be. And so you have those campers and that staff member or those staff members that try and stay together for the whole majority of their time together. And then you don't really distance inside that like you don't distance in your home. We're not wearing masks in our home. We're not all sitting 6 feet apart, although we probably are taking measures that we weren't before. So we're probably doing a higher level of sanitation. We're washing hands. So there are things within the cohorts you want to do. You want to do good hand hygiene. You want to cough into your elbow. You want to not share equipment or utensils unless they've been sanitized in between. So you do, it's not that you ignore all safety measures, but you're not distancing, you're not wearing protective equipment and masks within that household. And then what you do is you distance between the households. So if you have a program with 100 people, you may have 10 households that are within that program, and you organize your program around those 10 groups, or 15 groups, or 4 groups, however many you have. And there's, aside from adhering to the don't assemble in groups larger than requirements of your state and local health department, there's nothing magic about the number 10. So if you move into a later phase of the virus and you're allowed to have larger groups, you could have 12 in a group, you could have 14 in a group. Our experts are saying you probably don't want to have groups bigger than 20, and 10, close to 10 is a good measure. And the reason that you do this is that you are, if you have an instance where you suspect there might be coronavirus, if somebody starts showing symptoms, that you're able to have confidence that you know exactly who that child has been around. So there's a cohort there, and you may take that camper and isolate them and then send them home. But then you can monitor the other campers in that cohort. You don't necessarily have to send them home, and you might do somewhat more distancing with that group during a monitoring period. But if you're checking temperatures once a day, you might check it 3 times a day and ask about symptoms with that group. So it allows you to move forward with the program without shutting it down if there's one instance. It also allows it to prevent the spread. If you do end up having a case, you've had proper distancing between those cohorts. And so it's this idea of having these households that are distinct groups. And you can have, and this comes up a lot in a camp setting, but I saw a question about it in the chat as well. You can have staff that are not assigned to a cohort, that actually are working with multiple cohorts, but you need to be thoughtful about how they interact. And so the best thing they can do is they can distance. So if you're in a program space or a classroom and you can maintain distance between that instructor who is not with that cohort, that's ideal. Where there are certain instances that you simply can't maintain distance, then those counselors that are not about a part, or instructors who are not a part of the cohort, would use protective equipment. So they'd wear a mask, and depending on what they're doing, they may or may not wear gloves. And so, if you do food service in any of your programs, the grab and go where you're not serving is better. Where you are serving, having one person serve so that kids aren't all touching the utensils is better. Those people need to have masks on because they're probably not a part of that cohort. So the whole field guide is built around this idea of having them, 10 groups of the smallest circle is your household. Then you may have larger groups that are a part of your program. That's your larger circle that you have, but there's distancing between. So is that helpful? I'm happy to talk more about that.
Henry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say somewhat, unfortunately, our governor's office and OHA have actually been fairly strict that their expectation is even within cohorts, you are supposed to distance as much as possible. And so people are looking for how, besides wearing a pool noodle on your head, are there other ways you can safely and optimistically encourage youth to have their own safe space and interact and have those kind of fun game ideas instead of making it a tool where you're torturing another student or some of those other. And so I know that is there's been many questions on the validity and necessity of that implementation, but I think for now it's we're trying to say here's what it might look like to try and enforce enforce is maybe a bad word, encourage some safe habits within your programming space.
Right, so a couple of thoughts about that, and one is that Michelle's very connected to that. They've been working closely with the state folks in Oregon to help them understand our resources and the logic behind our resources, and they've actually been very receptive to that. They haven't allowed overnight camp yet, but so we're trying to educate them about what's behind the practices, and we will continue to do that. So as you move to different phases, maybe that changes. Things that our expert panel have said, and we all have constraints we have to work in, but outside is better than inside. So the spreading of the virus happens better in an outside, less in an outside setting than it does an inside setting. So that's one thing that you might be able to do. There's also a lot of information in our guide about proper sanitation of equipment that you're sharing in a space, proper sanitation of the space itself and different surfaces. That also can help. That doesn't take away the challenge that we're trying to manage children and having them stay away. Part of the rationale behind our guidance, and it was reflected in the CDC guidance, our resources, is recognizing that distancing is going to be a challenge, right? Especially with younger youth.
And Oregon has provided some pretty specific guidelines around indoor and outdoor space and multiple cohorts, 35 square feet per camper for indoor space and 75 square feet for outdoor. So that'll give you an idea of the number of cohorts you can have on your specific site. I also wanted to answer on the best practices on monitoring health. There is a webinar, I believe it's tomorrow, and it will, Dr. Blaisdell and Dr. Ambrose are doing it, and it talks about coronavirus considerations for camp. The conversation continues, and it will be about, how you can minimize the likelihood of an outbreak, how do you minimize the spread of illness during camp, and how do you manage a potential outbreak. And so that may be a valuable opportunity for folks. Again, it's free, and tomorrow it's at 10 a.m. Pacific time, so 1 p.m. Eastern time, and you can register for it right on our website.
I will also say that our experts will say that even if you're doing social distancing, that the cohorting model still has benefits that will help your program. And so
and I know there was probably a simpler answer to the general. I will make sure that we share that resource because I think that'll be an excellent opportunity. A specific question on just, do you take temperatures yourself or do you rely on parent answer, and
yes,
best practice?
Part of the field guide is around trying to create a closed community as much as you can. So, in order for this concentric circles model to work, you want to try and isolate that community as much as you can. And that means that you're minimizing the extent that parents enter the community. And so that may look different at different programs, but can we keep parents in cars and do drop off with very clear procedures so they don't get out of their cars? Can you stagger drop off and pickup? Can you not have a rolling drop off and pickup? Can you minimize how you're bringing outside experts in? Or when you have an outside expert in, that you're doing significant distancing with that expert and they're not interacting with the community. So I do think that there's a whole section on screening. It talks about different practices related to screening and that in a day situation where kids are going home each night, you probably are screening them upon reentry each morning, and that has to do with asking questions about in the beginning of the program, you're asking about their history prior to the program. But once it started, it's about asking about symptoms and it's taking a temperature. And so, the assumption will be that you will want to verify the temperature. And, are there ways that you could do that where the parent is taking it? Yes, absolutely. It's probably going to be easier if you have somebody in your program that's taking that temperature, but every program's different. So I don't think there's an explicit reference around whether it should be staff or parents. You just want to be a part of the process somehow, as opposed to saying take your temperature before you come in. That's better than nothing, but it would be safer if you're actually having a temperature taken on as a part of your entry process. And
Right.
you have to think about OSHA, you have to think about where other people are as well.
So Tony, so Henry, the OHA is actually encouraging that when you enter into a program, those scanner temperatures, and they're doing it in salons and they're doing it everywhere.
Right. Yeah.
And they're recording it.
Yeah.
I mean, so there's the cohort piece, but there's also the temperature piece. And if you're going in and out, like some of the college programs, if you leave, you go through the process again when you come back.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think it's, for the program, it's also protecting themselves. But Bethany, there was another question in the chat box, and we're almost at time, so I'm a little concerned.
Before you get to the chat box, let me just say one additional thing. So it is important, and I'm sure that you guys are already thinking about this and discussing it, but it's important to recognize that, kids get the sniffles all the time. And so, when you're asking about symptoms, there are symptoms that are non-specific to the coronavirus that you have to treat as if it's coronavirus. There are going to be instances that you're probably isolating children and having them go home for some period of time. Just talking about planning and training around how you're going to talk about that with the staff and with the kids, so that you're not stigmatizing people and you're being sensitive to the fact that just because somebody has a temperature doesn't mean they have the coronavirus. There are good ways and better ways to do that. And we have some resources around communication. I know there's some other great ones out there as well, but just being thoughtful about that as a part of your process.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I think there's definitely a lot of conversation still to go. I know we are planning on doing some more state-specific response documentation and making sure that all of these resources are cultivated and passed on to you program people. I did want to note the question I think Beth is speaking to came from one of our workforce partners, hoping that Aaron could reference if you're able to speak to the relationships between the youth development organizations and workforce entities, any good national examples or best practices on kind of workforce readiness and how workforce entities and summer programs could work together to kind of tap into that market and support youth and utilize that strand of support for implementation.
Yeah, so there's a ton of opportunity here, and I think that people have been dealing with the crisis in front of them and getting to whether or not there's going to be an operation. I am sure that there are great resources. We've been in good conversation with Aaron about what are the potentials between our organizations. We have a variety. So in Oregon, overnight camps can't run. Overnight camps had staff identified, most of them, and some day camps will choose not to run. So there is a population of people out there that were planning to work with youth that are now not working with youth. And certainly we would love to be a partner in figuring out if there's an opportunity to match make where there might be needs that you have in programs that are running. Another thing, this is not workforce development, but another thing to think about is that I do understand that many of your programs operate at schools, and many schools are closed and the facility is not available. There are also many camps that are not running their traditional programs, and if they are in proximity, there might be opportunity for collaboration there where they can host your program rather than running their own program. So, Michelle, I'll look to Michelle to figure out how we can take a conversation about identifying what those opportunities are between our two specific organizations. As we think about future, we were on the phone with the Mott Foundation this morning, and Aaron put the ACA and NSLA together with the Mott Foundation, and a lot of the conversation was around workforce development and service models and how do we, there's a lot of crossover between camps and out of school time experiences there. And so I can't point to a specific reference that we have right now. I do know that that's probably going to be more conversation as we continue down the road. And Gresham or Michelle, y'all may have specifics on that as well.
I think Aaron's on, and he might be ready to answer.
Well, no, sorry, I just wanted to be discreet. So the question is about what are some of the strategies to kind of to promote workforce development, youth development, and with our teenagers right now, Bethany?
Yeah.
Yes. And if there's some good systems in place that people might be able
first of all, a lot of summer youth employment programs are run at the mayoral level. So it's just good to figure out where in your community those programs sit and who's in charge and who's reaching out to the chambers of commerce. I would also say that's a meeting people should have if possible. They're the ones who are setting up the internships and have the business community to bring to the table, which really matters, because we could get all the kids and then where are you going to get them employed? Sometimes every summer we see young people getting jobs both at government agencies, working a lot of Parks and Rec, and working at other government agencies, or they work in these businesses. And I just think, again, there are some clever partnerships, but you have to get the right people to the table and figure out what skills they need. Somebody else, another group that has the ear of those businesses, might be working double overtime right now, if there's an agency in charge of economic development. When I was talking to the woman from Charlotte that I referenced, one of the ways that they have built a requirement for new companies coming to town to do placements of teenagers in summer youth employment, it's one of the incentives. They say, if we're going to lure you to set up your business in this community and give you some benefits, one of the things you have to do is be a placement for teenage summer youth employment. So just to know, I'm not saying that everyone does that, but those are the people having that conversation, and you want to be connected to them, because then they have the ear of the business and you could have, you can bring the kids. There was a great article, we can send it around, in the Hechinger report about the need for tutoring. And this is a kind of both a youth employment strategy and a kind of a summer learning loss prevention strategy here. We, again, like I said, we have 1 million plus college students who are home right now. Some of them were ready to work at summer camps. So we have to figure out how do we keep them employed. They have training in youth development. But that one of the strategies to try and get kids caught up to speed is, can we employ a lot more people to do individualized or small group tutoring? And a lot of college students might be equipped to do that. And that's something to think about. One other quick thing to think through going forward is about next year, and some of you were talking about it, if we have these staggered school schedules, and what does that mean in the days in between? And one thing pre-COVID, one of the reasons I think I ended up wanting to be a connection point to the ACA was in my last role with After School All-Stars, was in my last job, I had 5,000 part-time staff during the school year who were great with kids and trained all the school year. And then in the summer, we didn't have enough funding or work for them, and we had to let them go and hope and pray that they could come back in September if they didn't get another job. It was bonkers and crazy. And all I wanted to do was place all those people who are interested to get them jobs at summer camps, get them more experience, more training, and have them come roll right back into my program. So that's something to talk to Michelle and Henry to figure out who's your local camp and how do you make a seamless kind of a handoff back and forth between that, and what are some of their trainings, especially around the camps have this great, real experience around counselors and training and all the leadership development they do for teenagers to get them ready for those positions. So that's one thing. The companies is another. Chambers of Commerce, we should start there. Offices of Economic Development, please talk to them, and they will be excited to try and bring opportunities to the teens in your community.
Thanks, Aaron. And everyone, I want to be mindful. We're a little bit past time. We didn't make it through all of our slides. There are a couple questions that remain from our audience that are kind of those more generic ones that I don't think there's one specific answer to. But what we will be doing is continuing the conversation to facilitate between yourselves. What's working? What do you need to try out? And how can we, look to one another for some more opportunities and resources. I will note
questions related to the field guide that we could be helpful. Just feel free to email those to us, and we send those on to our expert panel if we don't, if somebody hadn't already asked the question. So just know that we'd love to be a resource if there's something that's helpful there for you.
Great.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And then there are more very hands-on, tangible resources constantly coming out. So there is from the national networks, from the state networks across the nation, there will be weekly activities in age groups coming out accessible online that you can download or hand out in person. And so we will have those up on our website, and we'll make sure those are included in our newsletter and sent out for everyone, as well as the Ms. and by Mott app that's accessible. And all of this information that we've got today, we'll send out to everyone. You can find it on our website or through this video posting. The webinar is recorded. We're so happy to have had so many of our national friends sharing, and hope that we got to share out some good information and resources for use. So thank you again for everyone who shared today. And we'll stay on for a moment to, if there's any other questions, make sure everyone gets connected.
Great. Thank you so much, Erin and Henry and Michelle. And you got my wheels turning around sort of hubbing job opportunities. So as the network, that'd be good work for us to do to help everyone make those connections.
Thank you, everyone. Anything anyone needs, we're all here to help you.
All right. Thanks, Erin.
Okay. Take care.
Bye.